Morning, everyone. On behalf of the ISO, I'd like to welcome you to today's Resource Adequacy Modeling and Program Design Track 3A Resource Visibility meeting to discuss the straw proposal. My name is Christina Guimera, representing ISO Stakeholder Affairs, and I will be facilitating today's meeting. Next slide, please. Just a reminder that today's call is being recorded for informational and convenience purposes only, and any related transcriptions should not be reprinted without the ISO's permission. Please keep comments respectful and professional today. Next slide, please. To ask questions during the meeting, you can open the participant and chat panels on the bottom right. You can then raise your hand by selecting the raise hand icon, or if you joined audio only, please press *3 on your device. And please remember to state your name and affiliation first before making any comments. And if you run into any issues raising your hand, you can also send comments in via the chat to all panelists or to myself directly. And if you run into any technical issues today, please contact Inteller Events, the host. Next slide, please. Today's agenda includes some opening comments and then a straw proposal discussion led by Hilary Staver and Partha Malvadkar. After this, we'll wrap up with next steps. So with that, I'll turn it over to Hilary to get us started.
All right. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. This is our straw proposal stakeholder meeting for Track 3A. You have here in the room this morning your ISO RA policy team, so Partha Malvadkar, Anya Gilbert, Ansel Lundberg, and myself. And we're also joined on the phone today by Abdul Muhammad Ali from RA Operations Engineering and David Swatlow from Legal. So thank you for joining us this morning. We are going to talk about the topic of resource visibility, and let's get right into it. Next slide, please. To start off, we wanted to do a quick review of the scope for Track 3 because it's been a few months. We last talked about these topics during the workshops in February. And if you may recall, and especially for those of you who have been with us through the working group process, Track 3 of the policy initiative here is covering a variety of topics related to the backstop procurement concept. And these are also topics that were the combined Tracks 3 and 4 in the original RA working group. And so to do a quick review of Track 3 at the top of the meeting here this morning, what we're going to be talking about today is the first topic that you'll see at the top there, which is about information on resource visibility. And I'll note that, and this will be clear from the straw proposal discussion today, when we talk about resource visibility, we're not looking yet at structural changes to any of the ISO's backstop procurement mechanisms. We're looking more at new information that can help us implement our existing backstop programs more effectively and efficiently. So we'll deal with that in resource visibility. And then looking further down the slide here, you can see we also will eventually be looking at reviewing and potentially updating the structure of the capacity procurement mechanism itself, as well as several topics related to kind of longer term day two adjustments to some of our processes around the EDAM resource sufficiency evaluation, the extended day ahead market resource sufficiency evaluation. So this is a slide that you would have seen in February, but if we move to the next slide, since one thing we've done here is introduced the Track 3A and 3B designations, I wanted to just take a moment and clarify how those are sorted. So Track 3A is going to be resource visibility. We are talking about that this morning. And then our potential structural policy changes to the backstop programs are going to be in Track 3B. And if we move to the next slide, just to talk a moment about schedule. This is a snapshot from the updated policy initiative roadmap that was published last week on our stakeholder initiatives page. And so, of course, Tracks 1 and 2, these are run by Ansel and Anya. Those will be upcoming. But for Track 3, you can see our 3A has already started on policy development, And 3B is going to be, there's been a little bit of a schedule adjustment since we spoke in February. That will be starting up later in 2025, closer to Q4. So that is that's our framing on scope and schedule. Does anyone else, Plaza, have any other comments before we move into the straw proposal discussion, or does anyone have questions? I see a hand from Carrie.
Hi, this is Carrie Bentley with the Western Power Trading Forum. I'm wondering if this changes the expected implementation of the different tracks too, and if you could speak to that, or maybe it's a later slide. If so, I'll wait.
We do have some information on implementation later in the presentation.
Okay, thanks. I'll wait.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not seeing any other questions at this time.
Sounds good. Well, in that case, let's move into the straw proposal. Next slide, please. So to start from the original question that got us into looking at resource visibility, what you can see here is a graph starting in 2019 or running through 2023 of offers into the competitive solicitation process. And the competitive solicitation process, if you recall, is the process by which the ISO gathers capacity offers from which we eventually select capacity for the backstop procurement mechanism called the CPM, the capacity procurement mechanism, in months and years, and sometimes inter-month processes when that is necessary. And so what you can see here is that over the past 5 years or so, offers into the competitive solicitation process have, in many months, dropped off sharply, and including sometimes to zero. And what that means is that there is less of a pool of capacity available in months when the ISO needs to conduct backstop procurement. And sometimes there have been instances when there is less capacity offered into the competitive solicitation process than the ISO's determined backstop procurement need. And so in that case, then ISO staff, we'll talk about this a little bit more on the next slide, we have processes that we then go into to try and locate more capacity, but it's more difficult and sometimes less effective. And so what we're looking at with this resource visibility effort is to provide ISO personnel with enhanced visibility into the amount of capacity available for capacity procurement mechanism designations in months where that is necessary, as well as to help flesh out the overall picture, as the grid is transforming of the reliability landscape. And so when we talk about these months in particular when there is less capacity offered than what is needed for backstop procurement, if we move into the next slide, there is a process for that. In months where there's less capacity offered into the competitive solicitation process than is needed for backstop, then the ISO will move into bilateral outreach. We will start reaching out to suppliers to try and locate additional eligible capacity and see if suppliers are willing to accept a CPM designation. And so the conditions for that, it cannot be capacity that has been shown as RA, which is a large portion of the fleet and one that the ISO already has visibility into through the supply plans, and it's capacity that has to be operationally available. And so today, for RA eligible capacity that is not shown as RA, we can see that it has not been shown as RA, but we don't know anything else about its contractual status and limited information about its availability. And so both of those are potentially important for whether it is available to accept a CPM designation. So if we move to the next slide, when we think about that bilateral outreach that the ISO conducts in an attempt to find capacity if not enough is offered into the competitive solicitation process. Now, I'll note these categories here are very much not to scale, but we wouldn't be able to see much else if they were. So what you can see here, just as a conceptual visualization, we've got the entire triangle here is the RA eligible fleet, and most of that has been shown as RA. You can see in the top category there. The starting point for bilateral outreach, if not enough capacity has been offered into the competitive solicitation process to meet the CPM need, is everything not shown as RA, the white and the green triangles there. And the purpose of this visualization is just to point out that of everything not shown as RA that is RA eligible, only a small portion of that will ultimately end up being CPM capacity. And so the more that the ISO is able to prioritize outreach to capacity that might in fact be available for a CPM designation, the more effectively we will be able to meet that backstop procurement need and ultimately run the CPM as intended and efficiently and effectively. And so I'll note that, we've had some discussion in some of the earlier working group meetings about why capacity offers might be dropping into the competitive solicitation process. And that is something that, in Track 3B, we'll have an opportunity to talk about the structure of the CPM and the CSP, and if there are changes there, potentially, maybe that process can be improved. But where we're coming from in Track 3A, kind of in the more immediate time frame, is that we see that sometimes the offers have been dropping, sometimes there isn't enough offered into that process. And to the extent that we can get more information about to the extent that we can get more visibility into the resources that have not been offered as RA, that will let us, in the more immediate time frame, target this bilateral outreach most effectively when we're not getting the capacity offered into the CSP. So I'll pause there, having reviewed kind of what prompted this conversation about visibility. Do we have any questions?
I'm not seeing any hands raised at this moment. Just a reminder to folks to raise your hand from the bottom right corner of the WebEx. And if you're having trouble finding that raise hand icon, you can always send in questions via the chat.
All right. Moving along then, next slide. So this then brings us to what are we proposing in order to provide the ISO with the information that would allow us to target this outreach most effectively when we need to find CPM capacity and not enough has been offered into the competitive solicitation process. And what we are proposing, what you see detailed in the straw proposal, is similar to the concept that we discussed in February, a new structure of monthly and annual reporting requirements for RA eligible capacity that has not been shown as RA in that given month or year. And we're proposing that it would be on the same timeline as the RA supply plans. So the structure there would be similar, and the actual requirements would be capacity that falls into each of these 5 categories. And these have been designed to hopefully be inclusive of everything that is RA eligible but has not been shown as RA. If you feel that anything is missing, that's part of the reason why we're discussing, so happy to take feedback there. But the categories that we've designed, moving from left to right, first we have capacity that has been sold outside of the CAISO balancing authority area. So anything that's been contracted for RA or an equivalent reliability service in another balancing authority area or RA program. Then we have capacity that has not been shown in that month or year due to potential unavailability. And this could cover a few different things. It might be something like ambient D rates. It could also be outages that have been reported in OMS. We would like to see, even if those outages have already been reported in OMS, that capacity would also fall in this category here. Then we have, moving further to the right, capacity that has not been shown as RA due to being reserved for substitution. And the way we are envisioning this could be any kind of arrangement that functionally involves the capacity being reserved for substitution. So if this is a resource's capacity is being reserved for substitution for another resource that is controlled by the same scheduling coordinator or contracted to another supplier for substitution, any of those are eligible, but what matters here is the functionality of being reserved for substitution. And this goes for the whole set of categories here, but I do just want to highlight for this one in particular, we recognize that in track 2, we are looking at the substitution processes. And so to the extent that there are any changes that are adopted there that end up having implications for this category, we would update the definition of that category to make sure that they're compatible. Then we have, moving further to the right, our fourth category is capacity that is under an RA contract but not shown. And this, we're not making any assumptions about what it's being used for there or why. It's really just a catch category if it's under a contract that hasn't been shown. And then finally, further to the right, we've got capacity that is not under any contract at all for that period of time. And so together, like I said, the hope is that these categories will provide a place for all capacity that hasn't been shown as RA. These reporting requirements would be carried out by scheduling coordinators who are responsible for scheduling this capacity. And this falls under the ISO's existing tariff section on reliability reporting. And I'll pause for questions briefly here, but why don't we, actually, why don't we, let's pause here. I see we've got a hand up. Alva?
Yes.
Hello, this is Alva Svoboda from PG&E. Can you hear me?
Good morning. Yes, we can.
Great. The one thing I thought might be, I'm assuming there's a cascading here, but I think if you could be a little bit more precise about how you'd expect essentially certain of these to be reported before others, because otherwise you could get information that wasn't precise enough. Or is that the idea of having these more precise categories? Or could you just describe how you see the flow of deciding which category to report into?
Thank you. That's a great question. And we'll talk a little bit about that on the next slide, but I think it's a great time to bring it up. So the way that we are envisioning this is that every reporting instance is a snapshot in time. We recognize that some capacity may change categories within the month. And so the way that we are envisioning this is it's a snapshot in time, and if capacity ends up changing statuses within the month, if it's in a different category upon outreach from the ISO, then that is fine. We understand that sometimes these intra-month changes do happen, as long as the reporting on the given timeline is a faithful snapshot of where things stood at that point in time. And
yeah, I can ask you a question, this may be back for Alva. So when you're talking about the question about, like, are you thinking that there might be, for a given day, that they might fall into more than one of these categories?
Right. And this is just a very surface reaction. I was just thinking, especially the last could be subject to information that was somebody who was reporting this might not know the more restrictive information and be putting it into the fourth category in particular. It's contracted, but it's not really known what the issue is. Again, I'm just responding because I've seen the slide here. I haven't looked at these before, but it sounds to me like basically the way you responded that you believe these are logically all mutually exclusive, and so you should be able to fit into one and only one of these categories, and that satisfies me as well. I have to just think about it more, but.
No, at least that was Hillary Abdul. David, please speak up. I mean, the way I was thinking about these were something that these were distinct, that we recognize the fact that intra-month there might be changes within a month, or it might be sold for part of a month out, part of a month in. it might be the case whereas Hillary's describing the status changes between, and we'll talk about, I think, a little bit about timing a little more, the start of the month versus the end of the month, how status might change. But I think we were thinking about these as being very distinct within days. And so there's probably some question internally, discussions of, should this be a daily report, like that someone's filling out because there's different statuses, or should this be kind of something that's sort of taken all just sort of one snapshot for the month? But yeah, no, thanks all for the question. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
And Alva, just this is Abdul, to clarify something, I think, maybe we go with an example, like maybe to reflect what you're saying. If it's a resource that is not under contract and also not shown due to potential unavailability, so, maybe that scenario where they can fall
Right.
under both of these, you
Right.
didn't contract it because you don't think it's going to be available. I think in this case, you would want to tell us that you put it under the not shown due potential unavailability. The not contracted, think of it as a catch-all other category. So if we didn't specify, if it's not under any of the first four categories and it's not under a contract, then please list it under not contracted. If it's under one of the categories, then please put it under those categories so we know specifically what's going on. So in this case, it would give us more insight that you think it's not available. That's why you didn't contract it.
Yeah, that goes exactly to my question. And I think that as long as that's described in so many words, I think that's appropriate. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Next, we have a hand raised by David Francis.
Hold on, can I just go back? This is David Zlotlo from ISO. Before we move on to Dave Francis, yeah. Alva and for others, I think maybe as this moves forward in comments, it would be helpful probably to understand if there's any scenarios entities have in mind where a resource would potentially fall in multiple categories at the same time. Because I think like Price said, we were thinking of these as all mutually exclusive, but if there are circumstances where you could think of that come up frequently where it would fall into multiple categories, that would be important to know. So as we move forward and refining the rules and then eventually get to tariff drafting, we can kind of keep that in mind, and maybe the tariff would have certain, additional statements about priority, sort of saying if it's not contracted, put it in that category regardless of whether it might also be on an outage that month. That's a clear example that we just talked about, where if it's not shown because it wasn't under contract or also under outage, really it's more important for us, or maybe it isn't, I don't know. But we need to think those things through, and I think having more understanding of some of the nuance of the scenarios would probably be helpful in terms of refining the rules.
Thank you. And now if we can go to David Francis, please.
Good morning. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, good morning.
Hi, it's Dave Francis, BP. I'm just curious, I'm catching up on the straw proposal. I know this idea's come up a couple of times. So based on a fresh look at 4671 and the tariff way you guys are proposing, is there any information you could not request from a participating generator? It just seems like it's really pretty broad.
David, would you like to speak to that?
Well, I think that's correct. That section is pretty broad, and we're trying to be judicious about how we're using it and not kind of ask for everything under the sun. But that section does, if I remember, references capacity, status, and so on, and so that's a more clear connection to this topic. But I think as has been put in the latest paper that was put out, I think being mindful of the idea that we're creating a pretty defined process with all these categories and stuff, we thought it was probably a better approach to sort of roll out the whole program as part of a stakeholder process and talk about the details and just kind of have a defined process and define categories in the tariff just so, you know, it would be ensure that it was discussed more fully and that, you know, there wasn't any concerns along those lines. But I mean, I think that existing section is pretty broad. Yes.
Okay, no, I think that's fair, and I think it's the step probably the right direction of, hey, here's exactly what we're looking for. I think there might be some disagreement among the parties of the validity of the current information you already have versus needing additional information and imposing additional reporting burdens on the supplier. But in an expanded market with multiple opportunities for RA obligations, I think it begs a fair question. So I think that's a fair answer. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Next in the queue, we have Carrie Bentley.
Hi, this is Carrie Bentley with the Western Power Trading Forum. I just had a quick question. When you say scheduling coordinator, I'm assuming you mean scheduling coordinator for the supplier and that the scheduling coordinator for the load serving entity, assuming they're not the same, won't have any obligations under this.
That is correct. We're referencing the scheduling coordinator for the supplier.
Okay, perfect. I got some, not panicked, but inquiries this morning about that. So I hope the next draft can be more clear that this really is just on the supplier. Thanks.
We can do that, yes. Thank you.
Next in the queue, we have Noah Tang.
They did.
Hi, good morning. This is Noah Tang from Middle River Power. Going back to sort of the question of how a resource may fit into multiple buckets, you know, for purposes like if a particular resource is maybe on outage for 1 week, and then but maybe and so that could be in the green box, the second box, and then the rest of the month it may be used for substitution for other resources in the portfolio. That could, you know, that could happen. I'm trying to better figure out how to, like, you know, this is, I don't want to go down to a daily mechanism or even hourly mechanism. You know, how do you foresee, like, just pick one, make your best guess?
No, this is part of it. Maybe you could help me understand what the challenges would be associated with doing it on daily granularity. I'm not proposing that we're going to do that. I'm just trying to, like, you made the assertion that you did not want to go to that level. You could imagine it being kind of click button where it's like saying, like, hey, I'm going to click a button and say, like, this is for the whole month, versus if you're needing something that's, yeah, if you're needing to express that. Is there a reason why, or is that?
Yeah, if the supply plans were click button, I might agree, but supply plans are Excel based and there's no API, there's nothing there. So I'm not certain that it's click button easy. There's no easy button.
Yeah, and you're just saying this is more of just like a Sierra tool issue of today. Is that right?
Oh, certainly.
No,
I mean, Sierra is not the best tool in the world, but I'm also mainly trying to figure out, like, you know, given what we currently have on a monthly based granularity of an RA product, how do I choose if I'm 1 week or 2 weeks in for an outage, but then the other 2 weeks of the month I'm substituting for other resources that I've either sold to, or, you know, for substitution or something like that.
Maybe if I can jump in, Hillary and Partha here. I think we're, good morning, Noah. I think we're talking about implementation details here a little bit, but I think the way we're envisioning it is to add these categories to the supply plan, and the supply plan has a start and end date. So you could specify, you can give us the capacity, if the capacity is static across the month, then you just have that start and end date for the start and end of the month. If you have a week where things are changing, like in your example, you're on an outage, you could put that as a, you know, start and end date for that week that this capacity is not shown because it's essentially unavailable. So the more details you can give us, the better, obviously, the more useful it's going to be for us. But we'll give you that flexibility to list the start and end date, or at least that's how we're envisioning it. We're obviously open for suggestions on how to implement this.
Okay, I think on a, if it's on a single resource basis, if you only had a single resource, trying to break that down on a monthly basis is may not be as challenging. But when you get into multiple resources, especially for some of the bigger suppliers, it becomes more of an administrative burden, which to me then begs the question, sort of what is the problem we're trying to solve? Is it the lack of the incentives within the CSP for resources to show up and understand where the current resources are going, given the sort of the more recent, challenges of the supply stack? And when would the ISO have sufficient information to figure out what the problems are to solve that problem? Because if the issue of visibility is really to see, okay, CSPs there's not enough capacity in CSP, we want to do some more data gathering. I think this is sort of maybe all the market participants can help facilitate that data. But if this is going forward for in the foreseeable future, this may not be, this might be really challenging. Also,
yeah, definitely.
Also,
definitely appreciate that.
Yeah.
Thanks. Go ahead.
Oh no, sorry. Also, contracted capacity to an LSC, but not shown. If it's not shown because they want to use it for substitution, as an SC who sells capacity to LSCs, I may only know up to that point that it's not shown. I do not know yet, may not know yet of their intentions of for use of substitution. How do I convey that, and how do I ensure that I'm not in violation of the tariff, by choosing one category or the other?
Yeah, definitely. I guess this is to the best of your knowledge. We'll put all these rules clearly in the tariff and the BPM, so you won't have any ambiguity. But this is to the best of your knowledge as an SC for the supplier, for the resource, at the time of submission. The reason we modified this category actually in response to your comments, and I think other SCs, you might not know why the LSC didn't show it. So we're not asking you to tell us why. We're just saying if you contract to LSC, but you're not showing it on a supply plan for whatever reason, then put it under this category. The LSC might withhold it because it wants to use it for substitution, maybe contracted to another LSC, or whatever reason they're doing it. You don't know, maybe you do, maybe you don't. We're not asking you to know this information. We're just saying, you know what's on your supply plan. If it's not there, but it's under contract, that's under contract, then put it under this category. So hopefully, and we can clarify as much as needed in the BPM. We'll go through the stakeholder process for the BPM. So obviously, if you guys think the language is not clear, we'll clarify it. And again, it's the overarching concept here is to your knowledge, the best of your knowledge, at the time of submission when you're submitting this information, how does it look like? And again, implementation details, obviously we're going to get into that when we work on the BRS. We'll share it with you guys. We'll get information, feedback. And also common goal is to make it as least burdensome on you as much as possible. But definitely appreciate the feedback.
Yeah, this is David here. I'll add that middle category not shown due to being reserved for substitution. The bullet there says controlled by the same SC or a different SC. I think the idea is when, the LSC, for example, is also the SC for the resource, that's probably where that category would apply more frequently. I think in your case, if you're talking about, you know, the SC for the resource is not the same as the LLC, you know, yeah, it might be the case that you're less likely to know, but I think it was conceivable there could be cases where, you know, the LSC tells the supplier, hey, don't show yourself on a supply plan this month, even though you're under contract, because we're going to want to redeploy your capacity. We have under contract to use a substitution for some other resource, but because you're under contract, we're going to direct you to do that or something. I mean, those are I think, a type of scenario that could come up, but you know, that's something that deals with the commercial arrangements amongst parties. We're not 100% sure what the arrangements are, and so on. So I think that middle one probably would much more likely not apply in the case of a entity that's just, a separate supplier from the SC for the supplier, totally separate from the SC for the LSC. In those cases, probably, yeah, you might not know why they didn't want you shown that month. But if you did know, then it would fall under that category.
Okay. Thanks. Oh, sorry. One last question just came up. Do you expect tariff changes for this, or only BPM?
We are planning ultimately to make some tariff changes just to provide more clear detail on the categories that we're looking for. Per David's comments earlier, even though this fits under a current tariff provision, given that we're envisioning this as an ongoing process, we see some benefit to providing more detail in the tariff. So we are eventually going to do both tariff and BPM changes.
Thanks.
Thank you. Next in the queue, we have Paul Nelson.
Good morning, Paul.
Hi, this is Paul with the CPUC Energy Division. Can people hear me okay?
We can.
All right, so my question is, and I think this is going to apply probably to categories of sold outside the CAISO BAA and substitution for a different SC. Are parties going to be required to identify those entities?
You mean as in identify the counterparty?
Yes, thank you. Yes.
We are not envisioning that it would include the counterparty, no. We're looking at the general contractual status there, but yeah, not envisioning requiring the counterparty.
Okay, and then my second related question is then, would this information be considered confidential or public?
This would be internal to the ISO. This would not be posted publicly.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Next in the queue, we have Mary Neal.
Hi, this is Mary Neal from ARM. I've written some comments about the PRR 1280 and these DR credits that currently the LSCs and CPUC jurisdiction get for CPUC compliance, but they're not counted by the CAISO. So I'm wondering, would these DR programs count under this blue category, this fourth category, where it's shown as RA, but for the CPUC, but it's not for the CAISO?
Let's see. Or did you?
I can help out with that, Hillary, if you like. Yeah. Hey, Mary. Yeah, these are, so this request is only for the resources that are on the NQC list that will be on the supply plans. So the credits that are not, including the DR credits that are not on the supply plan, we're not asking for. They're not part of this data request. Only the resources that are on the resource that have resource IDs in master file that have NQC on the NQC list. Those are the resources that we're asking for this data on for.
All right. So, but it was on the scope to sort of figure out what to do about this problem with these DR resources. So is that still in scope, or if you're not asking for it?
That would be, I think, perhaps, are you referring to, I think we had some discussion, and this topic will come up in track 3B about how those resources are related to CPM cost allocation.
Yeah, that's the bigger question. So if it's track 3B, that's fine. I just want to make sure I'm not missing something.
Yep. No, you're
Okay.
not. It is still in
All
the same
right.
scope, but it'll be track 3B.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hillary, I'm not seeing any further questions at this time.
All right. Well, in that case, why don't we move forward? We'll talk a little bit about feedback so far and implementation. Next slide, please. So appreciate the questions on the previous slide. We've kind of, as a result of that, a little bit covered what's on this slide. But what we wanted to do here is just provide a quick review of the feedback on this topic so far in the, based on the issue paper last fall, as well as our February workshops. And so, in particular, looking at our second bullet there with the 4 sub-bullets, we've covered some of this already, but I just wanted to highlight some of the refinements and clarifications we've made since February in order to address some of these. So the capacity categories, we have made some refinements to the definitions there, and I'll reiterate David's comment that, you know, part of the reason we wanted to put this through the full stakeholder process is to make sure that the capacities make sense and are mutually exclusive. So to the extent that you have additional feedback or, like was mentioned, scenarios where a resource might fall in 2 categories, we'd welcome those in the comments so that we can incorporate them in the next iteration. Then the second sub-bullet here, this has not changed, but just to reiterate, what we're looking at here is not going to, reporting this capacity is not going to impose any kind of new availability requirements. This is visibility only. So that, as has been the case from the beginning with this effort. The minimization of administrative burden, we appreciate that, you know, this is a new requirement, and we do want to ultimately implement it in a way that will minimize the burden there. So we'll talk a little bit more about implementation on the next slide, but we do hear the feedback on that and are keeping it in mind. And then the final slide there, actually, why don't we go back once? We've got one more sub-bullet there on the previous slide. Yeah, this one we touched on already, but, you know, just to reiterate, we appreciate there are kind of 2 ways that capacity can change in this time frame that we're discussing. There is capacity status change mid-month that a scheduling coordinator knows about ahead of time at the time of reporting, and like Abdul said, that is something that we're looking at building enough granularity into the reporting template to be able to reflect if a scheduling coordinator knows up front that, say, halfway through the month, capacity that was not contracted is going to be, and then alternatively, there are changes that happen mid-month and that were not known about ahead of time. And as we've discussed previously, those, we do understand that that happens. And so what we're looking for is each report is a snapshot of what is known at the time, with the understanding that sometimes intra-month changes do happen. So hopefully, yeah, we've made some refinements based on this feedback in February and are interested in further feedback based on this STAR proposal. If we move ahead one slide now, then we can talk a little bit about implementation. And what we are envisioning so far, partly in light of the question of administrative burden, is we would like to implement this in the long term in CIRA on the basis that that is a platform that is already being used for the RA supply plans. So it seems like hopefully the most efficient way to implement this would be to use the same platform. That said, implementation in CIRA, you know, that will take some time to develop out. And so for summer 2025, there is also going to be sort of a one-off version of this outside of CIRA for this summer, prior to the long-term CIRA implementation. That will be coming, that will be forthcoming just in the form of a data request. So that will be a one-time approach to this information, but in the long term, we're looking at implementing in CIRA, and that would likely be, there will be some time on that, so likely in 2026 would be the earliest that's available. But yeah, that is what we're thinking for implementation. You know, again, open to feedback on what works there, but trying to implement this in the most efficient way possible. And I'll pause there for questions. I know we talked a little bit about implementation earlier, but do we have any additional comments or questions?
I'm not seeing any hands raised, and I'm not seeing any, oh, we just have a hand raised right now from Noah Tong.
Hey,
Sure.
Noah. Hi, Noah Tong from Middle River Power. Can you talk about summer 2025? When, what months? You said, is it a single data request, or is it multiple data requests?
We're going to be looking at a single data request for the summer months. And Abdul, do you have any further comments on that?
Yeah, sure. Yes. So since we're doing this outside of Sierra, and we're trying to minimize the burden on the SCs, so the plan for the summer is to do a one-time request, one-time submission for the entire summer. This is for the months of June, July, August, and September. We will send the request information in a market notice in the next couple of days. We're thinking giving you guys about 3 weeks. Let us know if that's not enough time or too much time. The sooner we get the data, the better, obviously. So about 3 weeks, and it's going to explain all the data that we're looking for. We're going to consolidate some of the categories, again, to simplify and make it easier for you guys. So we're just going to keep it contract, essentially. We'll put the information in the market notice, but it's going to be contracted to a CAISO LSC, contracted externally, or not contracted. So we're consolidating the categories into just simple 3 categories, one-time submission, and it's going to be for the months of June through September. And again, we'll post a template and send the market notice explaining these details in the next few days.
June is literally in 4 days. So are you asking for sort of just by the time it's due, it'll be past June, slightly past June 1st? Or do you want to just go July forward?
We're thinking it's still useful for us to know the June data. One, by the time the submission is done, we'll still be in June. So if we run into any reliability events, like, we need to do a CPM, it could be still useful. And then also, just for us, for informational purposes, this data will be useful for us to inform, potentially future policy, understand what the contractual status of the resource is. So, even though I agree with you, June will be probably halfway through, but we think it's still going to be useful for us to keep the month of June.
Got it. Understood. Can the ISO team consider publishing an aggregated report on this data that it's gathered after the summer, given that policy development is for all of 2025 as we move forward with additional policy changes on this particular piece, or that it will feed into the I think track 2, whatever the one about CPM.
Yeah, 3D. I think we can. Hillary, I don't know if we can discuss that, but yeah, I think that's something we can discuss internally. Obviously, we'll have to talk to legal and all that, but yeah, we can look into that for sure.
Yeah, my initial feedback is that I think this is useful for, again, data gathering to find what the problem is potentially, or where things are going, and I don't think it's beneficial to go in the long term for this. So therefore, maybe if we do this simply only for the summer, that we don't need to do this for using the using a tariff process or BPM to embed it into the ISO's needs at all.
Well, I appreciate the feedback, and I think, first of all, to echo Abdul, we'll have to think about how we would sort of aggregate and present that. But I think to the extent that there is information that's relevant for our conversation in track 3B, we would look for a way to share and incorporate that. I think that can be part of the value of this information, is to inform the longer term conversation about how well our current backstop structures suit the current situation and what we might do to improve them. So I think that is a thing we can look into. And for now, we are looking at this as a permanent process, as a way to provide longer term visibility into the whole reliability landscape and both current and potentially future trends, now that we would be capturing information about a broader number of options, such as going outside the BAA. But I take your point that there's a question of long-term administrative effort here, and so I appreciate the feedback. We'll keep that in mind.
Thanks. I mean, long-term wise, with regards to trying to solve visibility, Middle River made a pitch in February and with regards to tracking the capacity and where it's going. I think that would help solve some of this administrative burden. I'm wondering whether or not you can share some of the internal or your own discussions and thoughts after reading comments and so forth, where you might take that particular implementation piece, because I think we both are on the same track of trying to get the ISO data. Our Middle River's proposal is sort of one way to make the tracking of all the different capacities into a sort of simpler process and reduce administrative burden on all SCs.
I appreciate the approach that you outlined there, and I'll remind everyone, for anyone who wasn't at the February workshop, we do have the slides posted to the initiative website. So if you'd like to look back at Middle River Power's presentation, that's available. And I appreciate that you have you presented a different philosophy on how we would access some of this information. I think that is a structure that we can keep in mind going forward, and probably would also fit in the kind of structural change theme of track 3B. We're envisioning this as a starting point to get some of this information as quickly as possible with minimal structural change, while also providing kind of a longer term window into some of these changes that may be happening in the landscape. So I think we're seeing this as a starting point, and what we adopt in track 3B, similarly to what I said about the other two tracks at the beginning, I think if things come out of track 3B that have implications for this process, then these requirements can evolve over time to be compatible. I'll pause there. Do you have anything you want to add, or Abdul or David?
No, I appreciate it, Noah, and I think that obviously in recapping your proposal here would probably not be very effective for all stakeholders. It was probably, from our internal discussion, it was a larger paradigm shift in terms of what RA would be doing, the role of the ISO, and some of the change you're making. Not that there weren't good ideas to float out. Based on the comments, we received comments too from other stakeholders, and maybe at a future meeting we can sort of rehash that. But I think we're open to some of those alternatives in the long run. I think we just sort of recognize the fact that that was a much larger paradigm shift in terms of how the RA program will be functioning. But yeah, no, thanks, Noah. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Bertha. I mean, I don't particularly think it's a huge paradigm shift itself. It's just more facilitation of supply plans and tracking the supply plans. We can talk about I guess we can talk about that offline more, and maybe it's certainly an implementation issue and trying to get there. Again, trying to get the ISO as much visibility as possible without the administrative burden of breaking down all the various categories that you all have brought up here. Additionally, it does transfer some of the responsibility to the various SCs who have contracted for the capacity. And I think that would help facilitate all of your data gathering as well. Thanks.
Thank you.
I'm not seeing any other questions coming in at this time, Hillary.
All right. Well, this brings us to the end of our discussion. If we move to the next slide. We will be posting the comment template shortly. So we are asking for comments by June 17th. And as Abdul mentioned, the data request for summer 2025 is going to be forthcoming shortly. So as you mentioned, that'll come through the form of a market notice. That'll be administered separately from the policy initiative. So that won't be posted to the initiative website. But yeah, we'll be posting comment template shortly, and we look forward to all of your feedback on anything related to the discussion here, the capacity categories. Yeah, thank you. We appreciate the feedback so far and look forward to refining this more. And Plaza?
We have one question.
Oh.
Carrie.
Carrie, please.
Hi, Carrie Bentley from the Western Power Trading Forum. Sorry, your last just thing about Abdul sending a market notice spurred a question. So I guess I had assumed this would go through the BPM process first before you would solicit the request. Do I have that wrong?
We are going to be proceeding with the data request before the BPM process. The BPM updates will happen in line with the longer term process that through which we're gonna make tariff changes and BPM updates. But you are correct that we are going to put the data request out before going through the BPM process.
Sorry, now I'm just a little confused. I thought this didn't need a tariff update.
It falls within the existing tariff authority, but we're choosing to make tariff changes in the long term just because since this is going to be an ongoing process and the capacity categories are somewhat specific, we thought ultimately it would be clearer to have that spelled out in a little more detail. But it does fall within the existing tariff authority under 4671. That's just a very general provision that doesn't provide a lot of detail on what we're doing here. So the current data request will be going out immediately, and then, but the longer term policy process is still going to make some tariff refinements, and there would be a BPM update as well through that.
Would you guys consider doing the BPM ahead of the tariff? It's very hard for, especially new scheduling coordinators to continually track all their obligations. And I'm wondering what would happen, for example, if they missed this obligation. Would it fall under the, not responding to a CAISO data request, which has some pretty heavy penalties, for example?
David, would you like to speak to that?
Right. So, Carrie, is your question about rules of conduct?
Yeah, like would this be
Basically.
would this be a rule of conduct violation if they didn't reply? I'm just thinking of I have a lot of clients who are very small scheduling coordinators. They have one asset. They don't really think about it. They, they schedule one little thing and they sometimes miss market notices and then are like, oh no, I'm just a little worried if it's not in the BPM.
Understood. Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, understood. Yeah, I understand the question. So I think for this data request for this summer, initially the idea is it's not going to be framed in a way that would initially trigger exposure to rules of conduct, but if, it may progress from there, meaning we're not trying to do that initially, but if we're, seeing just entities aren't responding, we'll follow up. And I think we could progress to that if it were necessary. But I think the initial request, we'll just try to get it without invoking that, and then we can see how necessary that is based on what we start getting back.
Okay. All right. Thank you, David.
Thank you, Carrie. I see we have a hand from Mohan.
Yeah, this is Mohan Nirula with CDWR. So I had a question on the summer 2025 data request. So let's say, by the deadline to submit summer 2025 information, let's assume that August or September plan is not submitted or finalized for the monthly sowing. Then how do we fill that information into that data request? So that was my quick question.
I take your point about this because we're doing it one time, we would be reporting on some of those months before the supply plan has been finalized. Am I understanding your question right?
Yeah, that's correct.
Abdul, do you want to speak to that? I think
I think. Oh, go ahead, Hillary.
I was going to say, I think we have some structure in mind to accommodate that uncertainty, but yeah, Abdul, do you want to speak to it?
Yeah, I think Mohan, for this summer, we're just gonna, at the time of the submission, when you give us the data for the months of June through September, fill in the data as up to date. Whatever the contractual status, fill in that data. For the summer, like I said, we consolidated the fields. So there will be one field only for under a contract to a CAISO LSC. So everything that's under a contract, whether you did show it in June, you showed it for July, you're planning to show it for maybe August and September, or not, regardless of how you're going to show it, if it's under contract, it's gonna fall under that category. So the total contracted megawatt capacity, put it there, and then everything that you sold outside the CAISO BAA, that's the other category, and then finally everything everything else you can put it under not contracted, and the breakdown in the template will be by start date, end date, so you can be as detailed as you see fit, as appropriate. Or as high level as again, it depends on the contractual status. If your resource has the same contractual status for the same megawatts across all 4 months, then that could be one line and you're done. But if that contractual status changes across the month, then you want to, you break it down, please, and specify the categories.
So my question was specific to, let's say we don't have September monthly plan finalized yet. So what numbers we gonna put in there, and some assumed number, or because the plan is not finalized. So that was my point.
Yeah, I mean that's what I'm saying, Mohan. Regardless of what you're gonna put on the plan, report the contractual status. So as of the time of, let's say you're submitting this data on June 5. On June 5 for September, how many megawatts are under contract to a CAISO LSC? Put that megawatt capacity. Regardless of how much you want to show, put that total amount as contracted. If you don't have a contract finalized yet, then don't put it. Then that's not under contract. As of June 5, there's no finalized contract. Therefore, it's not contracted. So to the best information, to the best of your knowledge, at the time of submission, that's what we're looking for.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Thank you.
We also have a hand raised by Noah Tomlinson.
Hey, this is Noah again. Can I make a suggestion that with regards to the data request, the ISO hold a CPG to go over how to respond to this, mainly because not all SCs follow the initiative meetings?
At Sierra CPG, Noah?
I'm sorry?
You mean like a Sierra CPG?
Or an RAC? You know, you've had RACPG before, CPG meetings before.
Yeah. I think that's a good idea. There's not a lot of time, but I can work with the communication team and see if there's time to squeeze a quick CPG call between now and the submission timeline.
Yeah, that'd be
Absolutely.
really helpful given what your conversation with Mohan just surfaced. You know. Thanks.
That's a good idea. Yeah, thank you.
And we also have a hand raised by Carrie Bentley.
Hi, Carrie Bentley with the Western Power Trading Forum again. Maybe this will be a good CPG conversation, but how should the Strategic Reliability Reserve reply to the data request?
The Strategic Reliability Reserve are no longer RA eligible. As far as I know, they're no longer getting NQC, so they do not have to respond. But if they are still on the list, I can't remember if we still have them on this year's list. But if they are, then they would be fully contracted to a CAISO LSC.
That's how you want them to respond. Yeah, well, the problem is the SCs will get the data request, right? Not the specific resources. So it just needs to be clear respond or not.
And that's a good question, Carrie. Do the SCs, is it the state contracting with the SCs for these resources? Are you aware how the SCs of the resources are seeing the contract?
Yeah, the state doesn't have an SC. The individual asset owners are the SC for those resources, or a third party. So, for example, like Tenaska will be an SC for the reliability reserve, or for a portion of it.
Okay, and they're signing the contracts with the state?
No, so let's take GenOn, for example, or an AES, right? They sign a contract with DWR, but then they also still have a scheduling coordinator because they have to, per your requirements, bid it in under specific conditions. So the state doesn't have a relationship with the scheduling coordinator, the asset owners do. So they'll get, their SC application, so they'll have to decide whether they need to reply or not.
Okay. Thank you for that. Appreciate it. Yeah, I think since they're no longer RA eligible, I think they don't have to report this data, and we know which ones are the strategic reliability resources, so we'll be able to account for them appropriately.
Okay, and for the avoidance of doubt, I was using Tenaska as just picking a scheduling coordinator out of the air, not saying that that's who their scheduling coordinator was.
Yeah.
Just to be clear.
Just an example. Yeah, I got it. Yep. Thank you.
All right, thanks.
I'm not seeing any other hands raised at this moment. Hillary, did you have any final thoughts before I take us through some announcement slides?
All right. Well, seeing no more hands, that brings us to the end of our agenda. So unless anyone, all right. Thank you everyone for the discussion today. The comment template will be forthcoming, and we look forward to your feedback. Over to you, Christina.
Thank you, Hillary. Next slide, please. I just have a few announcement slides before we wrap up today. Here you can see some of the meetings taking place with the ISO this week. Next slide, please. And here you can see some trainings, market simulations, and business practice manual updates. Next slide, please. And lastly, for insights into the ISO grid and market operations, be on the lookout for our Energy Matters blog, or you can always subscribe. And with that, we'd like to thank you so much for joining today's discussion. As a reminder, this meeting was recorded for informational and convenience purposes only. The video file will be posted on the initiative webpage. We thank you very much, and we hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you.
This event has concluded. Thank you for using event services. You may now disconnect.